Hey everyone, it's Types, and sorry for the background noise, but it can't be helped right now because we have some pressing matters to discuss, and I'm going to be telling you if Lugia VSTAR is well designed or not. And spoilers, it's not, as I'm sure many of you are aware. You played against it. Some people think it should be banned. I think that's a bit extreme, but it's something. And if you didn't see my video, that I'm not sure when it was released, but it should be released before this or when this is released. I talked about the 4 ways that cards should be analyzed. That's, are they fun to play in a vacuum? Or are they interesting in a vacuum? Interesting within the context or the meta? Are they interesting and fun to play against? And are they balanced or not? And we're going to take a look at Lugia VSTAR through those 4 aspects, as well as if there's anything else to discuss with it. Really, there's not, but let's take a look at that first one, which is it interesting in a vacuum? And also, for all 4 of these categories, I'll be ranking it out of 10. So, looking at Lugia VSTAR here, its stats are fine. 280 HP, Virtue cost of 2, nothing spectacular. Pretty much what you'd expect. Not bad, pretty good. And then you see its attack Tempest Dive for 4 colorless, 220. And you can discard a stadium in play. Obviously, that effective attack, pretty generic. And quite frankly, that attack's bad. So, some of you may know that there are ways of accelerating energy, and it can be assumed that there's some ways of accelerating energy, because there always are, but 4 energy is a lot. Like, that really, if you're just looking at this in a vacuum, 4 energy is pretty unpayable. I mean, you can get there over a long period of time if it results in a great benefit, but really 220 isn't that good. It's solid. It could definitely be worse, and we have seen worse, but it's pretty weak. So we move on to the VSTAR power. And its name is Summoning Star. It's an ability here. It says during your turn you may put up to 2 colorless Pokemon that don't have rule boxes, so single prizers can be Stage 2, Stage 1 Space X, from your discard pile onto your bench, and obviously you can only use 1 VSTAR power per game. So how is this useful? Well, you can use it to put Stage 2 or Stage 1 colorless Pokemon straight onto the bench without having to evolve them. That theoretically seems like an interesting idea. Generally, in a format, you'd expect to have a mixture of powerful Stage 1, Stage 2s, and basics. Oftentimes, those Stage 2s are very hard to set up. So, Lugia VSTAR looks like a nice partner to a number of colors Stage 2s. And as I said, we're looking at this in a vacuum, so we're not assuming any particular Stage 2s, but we're assuming that there are some solid options, which generally there are. So, for that, this card looks pretty alright, not particularly spectacular in terms of power level. But the VSTAR power is moderately interesting looking, and without any other context, it looks like it could be cool. So, it deserves like a 5 out of 10. It's not bad, but it's certainly not the best. It doesn't really look like it's super creative. Notably, its attack's pretty boring. But if its VSTAR power is interesting and has useful partners, it could be pretty cool. So let's look at it within context. So, really, Lugia VSTAR only has 1 partner for its VSTAR power. That's Archeops. With its ability Primal Turbo, what's during your turn, for each Archeops you have in play, you can search for 2 special energy and put them into, attach them to your Pokemon. And this is from your deck, so that's pretty strong. And when I say pretty strong, I mean Lugia can allow you to get 2 Archeopses out turn 2, and then you can be accelerating 4 special energy every turn. And for those of you who don't know how powerful that is, that's insane. If it was basic energy, it would still be very, very, very good. But it's not a special energy, which is insanely good. Notably, we look at Aurora energy here, which provides any type of energy. There are a few others, powerful colorless energy, double turbo energy, V-Guard energy, and there are a few others. But really, Aurora energy is amazing, and the rest are quite solid as well. So this is really, really strong, and that means you can set up pretty much any attacker you want in the whole game. Of course, assuming that you're not going to use it for its VSTAR power attack or ability, because you're going to use Lugia's to set it up. So Lugia Archeops looks very strong, but it's not necessarily the most interesting if that's the only partner with Lugia. So what are the other partners for its ability? Well, nothing. Really, there aren't any other considerations for its VSTAR power. I think the second best would be maybe Barrel, a Stage 1 that draws cards. There are a few others, but they're all not very good. So this is where Lugia starts to look really bad, because it doesn't have partners. So Lugia itself becomes super boring. Its attack's boring. Now its ability is boring. You're trying to do the same thing every game, and there aren't really any different ways of deck building Lugia itself, because you're always going to be pairing it with Archeops. From there, there are a few options. There are certainly a number of interesting attackers you can choose from. Notably, Yveltal, an amazing rare from Shining Fates. Very powerful to instant KO anything. Radiant Charizard, able to do hit big damage. Tank, and also just be very good overall. Yveltal and Radiant Charizard are relatively similar, though. And you can also power up Lugia with powerful colorless energies to be able to hit big damage. So we see these big damage attackers. Of course, big damage is always good, and Archeops allows you to set up these. This isn't necessarily super interesting because it's just hitting hard, fast, consistently. So nothing particularly interesting, but it's still kind of fun, especially because these are Pokemon that don't really see too much. Well, Yveltal doesn't see too much play outside of this, although you can play in a few other decks, but really it's pretty underwhelming. Radiant Charizard and Lugia themselves as attackers aren't that interesting, though. But then we also see Raikou, amazing rare, and you could even pair this with other amazing rares, but Raikou, ability to snipe the bench. And bench snipe is kind of interesting. It's certainly kind of fun to play as an option. And also it hits weakness on Lugia and some other good cards like Palkia. So you have that interesting option. And then you have Stoutland V, the fourth one I chose to show here. And I think a pretty interesting one as well. That says you can take an extra prize card if you KO a basic Pokemon that or any basic. So that's kind of interesting. And of course, as I mentioned with Lugia, you can do powerful energy. You can do the same thing with Stoutland. So we see a number of interesting attackers. There are even more because this opens up infinite opportunities. Keep in mind, though, these are derived from Archeops and not Lugia. But really, the two are one entity. But that also creates a problem in that they really aren't interesting apart from each other. They're not defined in their own way, which isn't really great card design. You want to be able to look at a card and say, oh, this is good. You really want to be able to separate the two, and really there's no reason to play one without the other. Both of them separately are really, really bad. Lugia by itself has no other partners, and then Archeops without Lugia is extremely awkward to set up. That being said, it's not that bad. Okay, so I give it a 3 out of 10. It's a bit straightforward. It's also a bit high roll because it's easy to not set up your Lugia because you need your Lugia, which is stage 1 essentially, and then you need 2 Archeops to discard, which isn't that easy to do, especially when you're playing all these different types of energy and Pokemon. So the likelihood that you're always going to be attacking with your ideal attacker isn't super high. Overall, it's not that interesting, especially because you're doing the same thing every game as well. Your VSTAR power is always trying to get put out as early as possible, and you're just trying to accelerate energy with Archeops to your ideal attacker, which is pretty straightforward. So, not that bad, but certainly not good. 3 out of 10. So you can see where it's starting to fall short. Moving on to the next category, and we're going to see its funness to play against is 1 out of 10 here. So let's see, why is it like this? So, of course, Lugia, VSTAR, and Archeops are very strong. But as I said, the strength isn't a big deal. We'll talk about that in the balance section. But Lugia and Archeops are pretty straightforward, which means playing against them oftentimes isn't as fun, but you never know. So there are some ways to counter it. Notably, Path to the Peak stopping Lugia's VSTAR power, Temple of Sinnoh turning off the special energy, Appleton and Yveltal punishing special energy, and Raikou punishing Lugia for using its VSTAR power early. Now, these are very strong counters. Notably, the 3 Pokemon can really crush Lugia, and the 2 stadiums have some interesting interactions. But the Pokemon here, that's why this gets a 1 out of 10, because they're really, if you have them in your deck, it's pretty much a free win for you. If you don't have them, it's pretty much an auto loss for you. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's pretty true. The matches aren't really interesting. They're really decided before they even start a lot of the time, so that's not particularly fun. And also, the only redeeming factor is Path to the Peak and Temple of Sinnoh having a moderately interesting interaction with Lugia, where they both get discarded by Lugia's attack, meaning that its attack actually provides more value here. But keep in mind that, realistically, in order for it to attack, the stadiums can't be in play. So really, that effect of the attack doesn't actually matter. It'll matter occasionally if your opponent's played Path to the Peak. You've attached 2 double turbo energies, but that's not very common at all. So they don't actually change that much. They're just an annoyance for both players, but they don't playing against Lugia isn't interesting, really in the slightest. Also, Lugia has so many attackers; they're so oppressive. So let's move on to balance here. This is going to be a bit better, 3 out of 10. And this is where we're looking at the counters as well as the tools that Lugia has. Lugia's pure strength with stuff like Yveltal and then the powerful energies, Aurora energies. It's very, very strong. So it's not particularly balanced. Luckily, the counters do keep it in check a little bit. Notably stuff like Yveltal. Those are some of the easiest to tech in. The Yveltal from Celebrations is pretty easy to tech in, not overpowered against Lugia. It's definitely the best tech option against Lugia here, but also it's not super interesting. You're probably still going to lose unless you lean heavily into Yveltal, in which case you're probably playing a control deck or semi-control deck. And Path to the Peak and Temple of Sinnoh do keep it in check a little bit, but oftentimes Lugia can get around it, or it'll get completely shut down by Path, which means it's a little more balanced, still overtuned a bit, so it can't be much higher than 3 out of 10, which means its grand score out of 40 is not too high. It is, in fact, a 12 out of 40. So why is it this way? Because it's bad, but it's not the worst. So why is this the case? As I said, it's kind of obnoxious to play against, both in a vacuum and in context. It's not that interesting. So it fails to really leave an interesting mark. It's just kind of chaotic, very, very one track minded type of card, because there's only one partner, as I said, for Lugia. And so this is where the problem lies, that it and Archeops are one vessel, which isn't horrible, but it's not great. So as I said, you want to separate them. And also a lot of its interactions aren't very fun. It's just overpowered in a lot of scenarios and very unfun to play against. And not necessarily very fun to play with either, other than the fact that you'll win a lot with it. And then it's not necessarily, when I played with it and when I've talked to people who've played with it, it's not very consistent. So really the only thing that matters is, do you set up or do you not set up? That decides the whole course of the game. 12 out of 40 isn't the worst, but it's bad. So this card that pretty much sums it up. It's bad, not the worst. But I wonder what your thoughts are on this card. I think these are my thoughts, and I think this is one of the more straightforward cards for me to analyze. The interactions, I dull them down a little bit, but there's stuff like Pumpkaboo, Dunsparce, a few other counter cards and counter cards, but really they're pretty straightforward. So yeah, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say though. So of course, feel free to comment that down below. What are your thoughts on Lugia, and what are your thoughts on the meta as a whole? Also, any other cards you want me to cover? I've been looking at Eternus VMAX as well as Colos' Experiment are the two I'm considering next, but I'm interested in your thoughts. And as always, if you enjoyed this, I'd appreciate if you like and subscribe. I'm probably talking pretty quickly. I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying analyzing this card. But I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.